Well, thanks for joining us for our final part of a series that we've been calling Money Mondays. We're trying to bring you helpful tips and advice and counsel towards handling money matters in our life. We've all got them, and so how do we approach them with wisdom? If you've missed any part of our series, love for you to go back and watch as we talked about debt and how to begin budgeting. We talked about how to make purchasing decisions and do that wisely, and also talked about how to manage money in different stages of life that all of us are at different places. Jared Nelson again with me as he's done some great job in this series, bringing us advice, 20 years of financial coaching and advice, and man, thank you so much for just what you poured into us during this series. In this final part, I want to tackle something that some people think about, maybe more of us should think about, and that's how do we live a generous life? I believe that God's Word calls us to be people of generosity, and one of the statements that we've made here in this house is that generosity doesn't start with abundance, but it starts with obedience. It doesn't start with having a lot, but it starts from our heart. And in part one, we talked about how ultimately everything belongs to God. It's all His, but He's entrusted different parts or different amounts to us to manage. And so one of the things that Scripture clearly teaches us to do and how we trust God with what He's entrusted to us is tithing. And so let's talk a little bit about tithing. Why would someone tithe? How do I start tithing? What does that look like for somebody maybe who's strapped financially? Give us some wisdom and counsel towards tithing.
Yeah, great question. And I think this is huge, probably one of the most important topics to understand and really follow and commit to when it comes to getting your personal finances straight. Because there were periods in my life where I did not biblically tithe, and then times where I did biblically tithe. And the differences in just the blessings, peace, everything in my household was totally different between those two times when I now look back over the last 20, 30 years. And so, in Malachi 3:10, it's one of the only places I know of in the Bible where it says, test me in this and watch what will happen. And, I can teach people about mutual funds and Rule of 72 and Roth IRAs and, retirement and all that stuff. But what it says will happen if you will tithe. The gates, the windows of heaven will open up and you'll get overflowing blessings from heaven. I guarantee that is better than any kind of retirement plan out there. And a lot of people, don't tithe because they think they can't afford to. Well, listen, my advice to you after being, in the business for 20 years, counseling literally thousands of families, God's Excel sheets work different than ours do. He will find ways to bless you financially and otherwise if you will honor what He says in His Word. And you've got to believe that. And I'm not even saying change it for your lifetime. Test Him. Try it for 90 days. Well, Jared, I just don't know if we can afford to. You can't afford not to. And so test it. And biblically tithing is 10% before taxes to the church that you go to. It's not to your Uncle Bob who needs some help. I'm going to tithe to Uncle Bob. No, it's to the church that you go to. If you're not involved in a church, get involved in a church. But that's biblically tithing. Now, when you do that, what you're saying, I believe, is that, hey, God, it's not 10% is yours. It's all is yours. Everything you've given to me, this entire paycheck, anything else that comes to me, it's all yours. I'm giving 10% back to you just to show you that understand that it is all yours. I'm just a steward of it. When He gets our heart right, when our heart gets right in that area, again, things change. Financially, physical things change. Now, you got to do it with the right heart. You can't say, well, I'm going to give $1,000 to my church so I can get $10,000 in that lottery ticket next week. No, you got to have the right heart. But if you have the right heart, I think that's where it starts. And I've not ever had anybody that I've counseled to do this that wasn't tithing, that then started tithing and came back to me and said, Jared, I just can't believe that didn't work. But I can tell you dozens and dozens of stories where people looked at their finances and it didn't make sense. Financially, it's like there's just no way we could do this, where it didn't make sense to do that. But they did it out of faith. And you wouldn't believe the kinds of things that happen where people got pay raises, people got money that came in from unexpected sources, debts were paid off, things that just really happened, that it is obviously God working in their life because their heart's right. So again, the single most important step, I would call that baby step one. If you're not tithing, do that. That's a huge, huge step in getting your personal finances straight.
Yeah, and I love that you referred to the track record of people that you've seen. Man, so many here in our spiritual family, story after story, people who've trusted God and then watched God provide in so many different ways. And it's not that He blows up our bank account to six figures always, but it's that He brings so much provision and grows our faith as we trust Him. And one of the things that we like to say is that, tithing, giving, being generous is not a money issue. it's a heart issue.
Right.
It always comes back to the heart. And God, do I really trust you? Do I really trust you? So as we think towards generosity, maybe a mindset that somebody might have is, I don't have a lot, or I'm strapped right now. I want to be generous. I feel like God's calling me to be generous. I see the fruit and the blessing of being generous, but I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do that. What would you advise somebody on in that thought?
Yeah, and so there's 3 ways to improve an overall financial situation. You've got to decrease your expenses, increase your income, or both. It's always got to be one of those. And so if I'm not biblically tithing, if I don't feel like I'm able to give above the tithe, to be generous and offering above that to needs that I see either in my church or outside above that tithe, then I think I would start off looking at my expenses, looking at my debt. A lot of people have debt, and the money that comes in the door is going back out immediately towards all of their creditors, to car payments and loans and things like that. Well, how would it feel if you were totally debt-free, including your house? Everything was paid off. How much more generous could someone be? And a lot of people haven't made that connect. And so I think for me, for sure, I'm trying to be a good steward where we've got our debt paid off, where the money that comes in, I believe God will get to you what he can get through you. And then now we're able to use a lot of those resources to really bless others, and not do it in a way to where everybody knows about it. It's storing up treasure where it really matters, storing up treasure in heaven, and giving anonymously and being able to do that even above your tithe. And I can't tell you how great that is. When you have a generous spirit and you want to give, but you're buried in debt or every dollar is going out the door, I think you should start with, okay, how can I get my expenses down? And that might mean sitting down with somebody. If you're not, a budget expert, or you don't feel like you know how to do it, maybe finding somebody in your small group or at your church, or a financial coach that can meet with you and look at expenses. I sit down with people all the time that they've got money going out the door, and they're like, I know we got this much coming in, but I just don't know where it's going. And so a lot of times, we can find $500, $800, $1,000 of just discretionary spending that they don't even realize where it's going. And if you can get that under control, well, that opens up the door right there. Okay, now I know exactly how I can tithe, how I can give above the tithe and offering, how I can be generous, and the rewards of that are incredible, to be able to give above just meeting your own needs. And there's so many blessings with that when you do that with the right heart.
Yeah, great counsel. I've always heard that God didn't call us to be with our resources, not to be a reservoir where it all just stops and sits, but to be a channel, that he runs that through us. One of the probably biggest mindsets, especially with social media in our world and so much that we see, is we see other people's highlight reel and we live in our maybe debt or being strapped, is that mindset of trying to keep up with the Joneses, that my life needs to look like theirs, that I need to have all the things that they have, and our paychecks don't all look the same, but my house needs to look like theirs. Talk to us for a moment, Jared, about how do we break that mindset in our life that we got to kind of keep up with the Joneses?
Yeah, and that's a tough one these days because of social media. And like you mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these other things, when you look at people, it's like they have these great cars and these great trips they're always going on, and they live this great lifestyle, and it just looks like they are wealthy. And what we don't know is what's in their bank account, what's in their investment account. So we really can't see behind the scenes. And everybody's story is different too. So I think we've got to be real cautious with social media and comparing our story to their story. I've got a friend of mine who owns a successful business, makes a real high income, but he drives a truck that's probably 20 years old. It is a beater of a truck, and it's because they are saving money. I know they have money saved. I know they give. They tithe, they give above the tithe. And, my values are, I respect that way more than somebody driving the newest late model, whatever. So I think it's our own heart. We got to look at our heart. Where are our values? If I'm driving an older vehicle, if I'm living in a smaller house, and the friends around me are making me feel bad about that, which isn't usually the case, but if they are, I'd reevaluate those relationships. If I'm in a 6-month, a year sprint to pay off my debt, to save money, to build up an emergency fund, and I'm going to keep an older car for a little bit of time, and a friend says, hey, how come you're driving that? I'm going to open up that conversation, right? I'm going to say, we're in a sprint right now, and we're paying off a bunch of debt, and we're saving, and we've got some stuff we're giving to. And I don't know, if you've got a friend that doesn't encourage that, again, I would say that friend is suspect. And so I'm trying to surround myself with the right influences. And I think it's, that keeping up with the Joneses is most of the Joneses are broke. They're buried in debt and they're stressed out. I've met with people that had beautiful homes, 2 late model cars, kids in private schools, and zero saved. Had $150,000 in credit card debt at real high interest rates. literally making 10 grand a month, but spending 11,000 a month, and just buried, and just are stressed and just don't know what to do. And so if that's you, there's hope. But don't think when you look at people, a lot of people are like that, and they've got this facade that's not reality. So, change your values, where when you see somebody that's driving something really nice or living in a nice neighborhood or going on these fancy trips, you don't know their backstory. You don't know their debt situation, things like that. So go your own route, go your own path, and realize having no debt, having money saved up, an emergency fund on track for retirement, maybe on track for college, that piece, when you do that, when you're a good steward like that, when you're biblically tithing, when you've managed your finances to a point where you can give above the tithe, that's where real peace comes from. It's not that new jet ski, it's not that boat, it's not that new car. We think that's going to give us joy. It doesn't. It's being able to give, help others, pour into others. That's where that comes from.
Such great counsel. And I love the phrase, I believe maybe Dave Ramsey coined it. He says, live like no one else now. Make decisions like no one else now, so that later you can live and give like no one else. But it starts with making those wise decisions right now, realizing that God, it all belongs to you, and I want to make honoring decisions that allow me to honor you and bless others along the way. Jerry, thank you so much for your investment in us during this series that we're calling Money Mondays. Hey, if you've got questions, we realize you probably do, in regards to money and finances, we want to help you. That's really why we've done this whole series and put it together and brought Jared in. So if you've got questions, don't hesitate to text us still. You can text the word money, M-O-N-E-Y, to 601-397-6111. That'll simply allow us to connect you with some free resources, also to connect you with some conversations with maybe a financial coach or advisor who can help you as you try to work to get out of debt, or perhaps to set up a budget for you, your family, and your household, as we all work to live in freedom that God calls us to financially. Thanks again for being a part of our Money Monday series.